What is up, everyone? C-Dub here. Between the books, mysterious music, and Scream content, I'm always working on something new. Keep an eye out for eerie articles from old newspapers, with the first episode being released on September 8th. And today, Movie Czars, in which my buddy Zach and I discuss everything about everything regarding our favorite films, franchises, and of course, directors. In this episode, our director of choice is none other than Quentin Tarantino. So, spoiler warning for not just Tarantino films, but also for the Godfather, Scream, and Star Wars series. Also note, being that this is the first episode, we of course ran into a bit of a malfunction with one of the microphones. So, next episode, the sound will be significantly clearer. This time around, we think you fellow movie buffs out there will enjoy our enthusiasm for Tarantino's work, and we welcome you to join the conversation by posting your ranking of his films in the comments below. Also, please be sure to like, subscribe, share, and ring the bell. Now, as you commute, do chores, or exercise, pop in those earbuds or crank up that stereo, and let time pass with Movie Czars. 2011 is 10 years ago. That seems like yesterday.
Oh yeah, so, no, there's a whole bunch of stuff that I kind of measure in my brain of like, I mean, obviously just from like the nerd standpoint, I was sitting there thinking to myself about how like when I started there were 6 Star Wars movies, and there are always going to be 6 Star Wars movies. When I walked out of there are 11.
Yeah,
or like,
back in 2011 there was 6 Tarantino movies.
That is a good segue.
Kill Bill is. I remember Kill Bill Volume 1, the trailer. It was advertised as the 4th film by Tarantino. I think Tarantino has always kind of had this countdown to his Big 10. We've discussed this a few times, and both times that I remember talking about it, I consider Kill Bill 2 different volumes. You had mentioned that you consider it one movie, just like Tarantino does, and there's plenty of grounds for that. I don't think this is the conversation for me to get into why I consider it 2 different movies. So for the sake of our countdown, I will consider it one movie. So we will be doing a countdown from 9 to 1.
All right, works for me. And and trust me, every single one of the arguments you're going to make about it being 2, I am in complete agreement with. Like the best one I've heard anybody ever make is like, well, if it was one movie, why did I have to pay for 2 tickets? And it's like, yeah, it's like you are completely right. But it's just like I've been binging a lot of these interviews he's doing to promote the book. But he was recounting the whole like they were making the movie and it was all one movie, and Harvey came to him and was like, man, it sure is going to be a shame. All this stuff you're going to have to cut. Quentin's like, well, what do you mean? He's just like, well, we can't release a 4-hour movie like this. We're going to cut this thing down to like maybe 2:45. And, Harvey was already notorious for buying movies at, Sundance and editing them himself basically and just cutting a bunch of shit out. So like even his golden child is being told like, we're going to cut like an hour at least off this thing. And, so that it was while they were filming at that point being like, okay, well, we're going to chop, Harvey basically being like, well, if we chop this in half, we can make it 2 movies and you'll get to keep everything you want to keep. And at that point, I can really understand where you go like, yes, I want to do that, because I can't envision what that movie would look like as a one movie at like 2 hours and 45 minutes.
No, that wouldn't work. I really need to see the whole bloody affair. I've heard about this for like 15 years and it's never come out.
Yeah.
But, Kill Bill Volume 1 and Kill Bill Volume 2, I'm sorry, they just feel like 2 way different movies. And maybe that would have worked if there was an intermission, because it's just, you got the Kung Fu half and the spaghetti Western half. But I feel like if, this was a seamless 4-hour movie, I don't think it would work. I have a very hard time seeing it as one seamless story.
He's actually screened the whole bloody affair a handful of times, like a actual print of it. And from what I understand, I mean, you and I can basically recreate that on our own with like DVD copies.
Yep.
Because from what I understand, there is next to nothing. I think the only difference is supposed to be, of course, obviously no credits on 1 until we hit 2, which is funny because 2 has the combined credits at the end. But when you watch the whole bloody affair, apparently the only real difference is, well, 1, the colorized Crazy 88 fight, and the that opening where she's talking to the camera in 2, that's gone. So it just goes straight from like, does she know her daughter's alive, to whatever comes after her talking to the screen. So in my head, I've always had this idea of like, oh, maybe there's extra scenes thrown in too. And it's like, not really. It's just cutting that out. And speaking of the Crazy 88 fight, this is one of those things where it's like, oh yeah, we have the internet now. I had not actually seen the colorized version of that until about 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, I never actually bothered to watch it, but I do believe other countries have released the colorized version.
That's how I saw. Yeah, that's how I saw it.
Yeah. I mean, I think they call them recuts, where someone who's not affiliated with the film changes. I think it was
Topher Grace.
Yes.
Yeah,
okay, yeah, from that 70s show. Yeah.
Yeah, he famously put together, and it's janky as all hell, but like, he famously put together the Seinfeld reunion episode from that season of Curb. So like all the little shots you see of like people watching the scenes on TV.
Yeah.
And he has to kind of meld into like table read scenes from Curb, but he basically turned that within the reality of Curb extra Seinfeld episode into like a 7-minute Seinfeld episode, basically. That's an easy fistly. Did 50-minute maybe, or maybe even like an hour and a half or something, but he condensed all 3 Star Wars prequels into like one sitting of like maybe one feature length or even like 50 minutes. But apparently everybody who's seen it, that he's only ever shown to his friends because he doesn't want to get, sued for anything. Apparently everybody who's seen it's like, it's fantastic.
Yeah.
So it's like, I would love if you told me I could watch those movies in like 45 minutes and actually enjoy myself.
Yep.
So yeah, no, it's interesting how people do that type of stuff.
I mean, pacing really goes a long way with the quality of a movie. And just to think, how, terribly received films like the Star Wars prequels and the Hobbit trilogy could have such a turnaround. I haven't seen the Godfather coda yet, but that is endorsed by some of the cast members. So it's like 4 minutes shorter, I think.
That is the only version of that movie I've seen.
I'm going to finish reading the Godfather novel. I'm almost done with it. And then I'm going to rewatch the trilogy again. I've seen the trilogy countless times, but I never read the book. But instead of watching Godfather 3 this time around, I think I'm going to watch the Godfather coda. But based on what I've heard, it sounds to me like it's almost a recut of a lot of the alternate takes that were in the DVD special feature of Godfather 3. Quite honestly, what I read, it didn't sound anything new. I feel like I've seen some form of this before. I think Coppola's been toying with it for 20 years anyway. So like I never bothered with 3 because I only ever heard bad stuff. But then like in the last few years, it's gotten like a lot more kind of like defenders being like, look, it's not as good as the first 2, but it's also not the Phantom Menace. So like I kept going, okay, I'm going to watch it eventually. I'll watch it eventually. My parents had never seen 3 either. And they're the ones who first got me watching them because my aunt had a VHS of the chronological cut that they used to run on like HBO and stuff. Yep.
So that was actually the first way I ever even saw it. Was just
I remember you saying that. Yeah.
Yeah. 1 and 2 is just one long, like 7-hour set.
Right. But they included the deleted. They included the deleted scenes as well.
Yep. So yeah, like when that coda thing came out, they were interested in it. It was like mid lockdown and all that. So it was like, all right, I'm going to get the Blu-ray, and I guess the 3 of us are going to finally watch Godfather 3. So like, got it. We sat down, watched it as a family. Nobody disliked it, but it was also kind of like shrug your shoulders and move on. But I did intend to watch the standard version of 3 like afterwards to kind of get a comparison going, and I just never bothered. So that's something I'll probably end up doing eventually, is maybe take a weekend and like watch one night, the other night, kind of judge them, like that. But yeah, as a whole, like, I don't know, there was, I miss, obviously you're gonna miss Robert Duvall, not being there.
That was huge.
Okay, you lose Brando in the first, but then you make up with it with De Niro in the second. So it's like, this is great. So what's the third gonna offer me? Sofia Coppola. It's like, okay, this isn't, and obviously no John Cazale, even if he was alive, obviously Fredo's dead, but like, all these people who really like elevated those movies are gone, and then you watch it and it's like, Pacino, not his best performance.
I hated that haircut, and
oh my god,
and
it's
his
ridiculous.
voice. It's just
terrible. The hair is insane. Like, just looking at it, being like, what is he thinking with this?
So for me, I don't really expect to think much differently of the Godfather coda than I do of Godfather 3. I'm just not convinced that it's going to have a huge impact on the quality of the movie. I think it's just a way to get people to see the original vision, which I think is ultimately just a minor thing that maybe Coppola had thought that, had this been different, maybe it would have gotten more well received. I don't think so. I actually don't have a sour opinion on Godfather 3. There were things about it that I really don't like. One, the haircut. Two, I don't like how Connie, Michael's sister, is so involved in the business all of a sudden. I found that very annoying. I felt that they just did that so they had a familiar character be more involved. A lot of naysayers say that Godfather 3 was not a necessary movie, and I thought it was actually their approach was somewhat good, because if you look at the Godfather 1, it's about a father and the unlikely son taking over the business, and then in Godfather 2, it's about the father at the son's age, and I feel like it was very fitting to have a movie where the son is the father's age in the first film. And I think that it was really relying on Pacino in Godfather 3 paralleling Marlon Brando from the first film. And I think it just wasn't convincing enough. It wasn't good enough, and people just overlooked it for that reason. And also, it was a cash grab. I mean, they should have paid Robert Duvall a fair wage. He was a very important character.
Yeah.
And I think, when you watch, The Godfather 2, you can see that tension is slowly starting to build between the two characters. And I think that should have come to a head in the third film. Yeah, too many missed opportunities. It's so unfortunate. So.
Yeah, well, and like the Talia Shire of it all, quite frankly, too. Like, I'm with you about how it definitely felt kind of weird of like her character got really elevated to being like, almost not quite a lead, but like compared to how much we'd seen Connie in the first two movies, she was getting a promotion in that movie. And it definitely feels weird, but I kind of thought she was one of the more interesting parts of that movie in the cut that I watched, at least. Like, I was sitting there going like, she's really, really good in this. Now, mind you, it'd be really probably even better if we'd had like a Robert Duvall there to take up some of that screen time.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, and I totally get the whole idea too of like, Vito dies with at least, one of his grandkids there with him, where, Michael is dying with like essentially no family who loves him. Like when Vito went, he'd at least kept his family in his life and people cared about him and all that, where like Michael kind of just dies as a lonely, guy vibes. Like there's some real powerful stuff there, but just the way you get to that does not work.
Well, any long story, but a lot of third installments in particular go wrong is that they actually have a really excellent idea on like usually the last scene or the concept in general, but they just kind of blunder it on the way there, and it just the payoff doesn't end up being worth it. Like that final scene that you're describing, it's an excellent ending in my opinion. I think it's the best way to end that story. But mind you, the scene before or the sequence before that, we got the poison cannoli. I mean, it's just absolutely ridiculous.
Oh yeah. That whole thing being like, wait, so she has one, but I guess she knew that like if I take like a bite only this deep, I don't hit the poison yet. It's just like, that whole thing blew my mind as far as like, what are you doing?
And again, this is a character. I mean, granted, we're adults well past when these movies came out. So it's not like I had, 15 years to, get used to these characters. But, just knowing the time frame, Connie was not that type of person to orchestrate that. I did not see enough of a transition to be convinced by that.
That's also, unfortunately, one of the drawbacks, though, of large gaps between movies with like, yeah, we, you know, 'cause you're right. As an audience member, we don't see that. But also when you go, these characters though have lived 20 years off screen, you know, and I, you know, so you kind of sit there and go like, she's had time to become that person, but when you don't see it, it definitely like, because I like that's a big complaint you get with like the Star Wars movies of like,
Yeah.
well, Luke wouldn't. It's like, yeah, and also in real life, the last time you saw Luke was 1983.
Right.
You
But
know,
I mean,
you know,
so the time jump is completely fine. I think where, you know, Luke Skywalker and Connie Corleone, what happens is the writer doesn't realize that they actually need to redevelop the character so that the audience actually realizes what happens in some form between that 20 years. It's not good writing to say, well, 20 years has passed by, they've changed a lot, and here's who they are now. I don't think I can get on board with Luke drinking green breast milk or Connie killing someone with a poison cannoli.
well, okay,
I'm actually a big supporter of time jumps. I think it can very well benefit the story, and Godfather 3 is a good example. It's just that movie blundered the opportunity, so therefore I don't really always have a convincing argument when I try to make that point.
Well, the green milk thing, which I think is one of the most hilarious critiques of not just that movie, of any movie. It's like, they live in Star Wars. Where do you think they're getting their milk? Like, that's what used to be so entertaining. It's like you watch like the cantina and you're like, oh, what's that back there? That thing's gross, or that thing looks really cool, or that's whatever. And people are like, oh, he's drinking it out of this, you know, disgusting space slug thing. And it's just like, yeah, because that's the world they fucking live in. I don't know. That critique is like, were you expecting him to get it from like a human, like an Earth cow?
Well, but
it looked like our milk?
I mean, that's an interesting point, but at the same time, the fact that Luke has purposefully backed himself into that corner, which completely contradicts the character as far as we've seen his development, to be secluded on an island where he has to resort to drinking green breast milk. Again, yeah, I may have had a better sense of humor about it had the writing properly transitioned that 20-year time gap. But all of a sudden, all it looks like is this crazy man played by the same actor that played a role that I absolutely love. And now he's drinking green breast milk and he's a recluse. It's almost a 180. Maybe it is a cheap shot, but at the same time, I feel like the green breast milk has valid criticism.
It's the fact when people point out like how he's getting it and like, oh, it's green or what. It's just like, it's just one of those things I look at and I just kind of go, we're looking at it too much with our own human eyes of how we would get milk. And it'd be weird enough if I did see somebody like just like milk a cow and then like drink it straight up. But also if you were to watch like some Western or something where somebody resorts to just doing something it's the equivalent of that, you wouldn't see people being like as weirded out as they are by the fact that in the Star Wars world that is a cow. You know what I'm saying? Like it's I don't know. It was just one of those. I feel like if you'd seen Yoda do that in The Empire Strikes Back, people would have grown up on it and been fine with it.
You know, I don't see how that was necessary. I thought it was a bad approach at comic relief and that it had really nothing to do with the story. And it was weird. I don't care if the breast milk was blue, the circumstance in which it was introduced.
I definitely think that there's no need for showing how he's surviving because quite frankly, like you never really delve into like what do Han and Chewie eat on the Falcon? Like you just assume like people are eating and we just move on, right? But looking at how so many people with like their cinema sins counter of like, well, you know, I never see this guy take a leak. Does he ever have to pee? Ding. I can feel how like, yeah, it's a funny moment. Like those movies are filled with funny moments, but like I do have also a weird feeling if we didn't see him do that and we didn't see him, you know, get that giant fish that he, you know, spears and eats. I do feel you would have gotten like some other pushback though, being like, oh yeah, he's on that island by himself. How does he not starve to death? And it's like, well, we assume that he goes out and fishes and gets, you know, sustenance from other things. But there's a weird thing where people are going to like overreact if we don't actually see it, which to me is where you really get into like fandom was a mistake.
I see where you're going with this. Like if they didn't introduce that, we could, one could argue, a naysayer could argue that, hey, well, what does he survive on? Why don't we see that? It's not well developed enough. Okay, but spearing a fish is one thing. And if he was milking a cow substitute that had green breast milk, that was fine. But he rubs it in the face of Ray, and I don't know what creature that is, has this look of being turned on, and Ray looks away. It was very awkward. It was unnecessarily awkward. It was a joke. It was an attempt of comic relief that did not land. And I
would not say the creature, and I'm so happy that I'm not 13 anymore, because if we had the same conversation at 13 about any of these movies, I'd be going, that creature is called whatever, and he's a native of this. It's like, I still have some of that information in my brain, but it's like, I'm perfectly cool if you want to call Ponda Baba Walrus Man. Like, I don't care. But if, like, I was 13, like, no, he's not named Walrus Man. That was only on the toys from the 70s. But I would not argue that it looks turned on. But for sure, you have the thing where Ray's looking at it going like, ew, that looks gross, which is kind of supposed to be how, we look at it. And he for sure, like the way he takes a swig of it is kind of like milking to the camera, for lack of a better term. But like, it is a scene that you don't necessarily need. It's also a total of 15 seconds. And to me, it's like, if you're going to say that 15 seconds could rank as like even one of your top complaints about a movie like that, that's a pretty good movie, I would argue then, because if I were to sit down right now and watch the, George's most recent cut of like A New Hope, in that completely unnecessary scene with Han Solo, that's like a 4-minute scene that not only is unnecessary to that movie, but then proceeds to kind of kill the reveal of Jabba in Return of the Jedi. So like, to me, I look at it going like, none of these are perfect. And a 15-second, like, okay, that's kind of like a weird joke that maybe doesn't land quite as much. But to me, it's kind of in one ear out the other, where you look at, if it was something along the lines of that Jabba the Hutt scene and that's now in A New Hope, that's one where I could sit there and go like, you can have an actual conversation of like, this is doing actual damage to not just the movie I'm watching, but like the reveal in a later movie.
I mean, I'm not approaching it as a criticism for The Last Jedi. I'm approaching it criticism for doing a complete 180 on the character. I don't think Luke Skywalker, Jedi, would rub a student or take a swig like that. It was so weird. It was so, it felt like it was so against the character, at least when we last saw him. And I think it would have benefited the audience to actually been reintroduced to Luke in some familiar fashion, which I don't think we got.
Yeah.
And same with the poison cannoli.
Right. But in that one, to me though, is even if you'd had Michael doing that as opposed to Connie, there's just the logistics of it though, of like, how many of them were poisoned? Are you sure you grabbed the right one? Do they all have just a little bit of poison in them? But if I just bite the tip, I'll be, because I forget, she doesn't eat the whole thing, does she? She like takes a bite of one.
Yeah, I mean, it almost looks like she's sucking the cream out of the end and then leaves the rest for him. It's awkward. And that didn't even need to be there. Why couldn't he just say thank you? Why did he make her take a bite? It was just ugh.
See, to me, that's a much bigger thing of like, like if you were in a situation where going like somebody would take a risk of poisoning themselves to, also take this person out, like, okay, I can live with that. That makes sense. But like, she's clearly not going, I'm going to sacrifice myself to also take this guy out with me. It was really stupid and like doesn't help the ending of that movie at all. Yeah, let's get on to the main event though.
All right. Why don't you start then? What's your number 9?
All right, number 9, which actually, unfortunately, it's not lining up perfectly. I'm going to go with The Hateful Eight.
Oh, wow. Okay. I'm going with Kill Bill.
As a whole.
Even as a whole, and we can get into it a little more. So I guess we'll get to this in a little while. But to recap, what we're doing here is we're going down the list rapidly until a movie has hit each of our lists, and then we'll kind of discuss why it's placed on each of our
general,
list.
General thoughts on it at that point. So okay. So I'm Hateful Eight at the bottom. You're at Kill Bill at the bottom, which I did not see coming.
I got some controversial orders here.
Yeah. So number 8, I'm going to go with Death Proof.
Okay. I'm going with another controversial pick, Django Unchained.
Not as controversial because that is going to be the first thing we're going to discuss, because number 7 is Django Unchained.
All right.
So when we first discussed these, I did say something, bury the lead here a little bit with this. I don't think any of these are bad movies.
Yep.
I think the worst one, I would still probably go 4 stars out of 5. So before anybody wants to be like, they hate Django Unchained, it's like, no, Django Unchained probably was still one of my top 10 movies that year.
Oh yeah, no, I remember 2012 vividly, and Django Unchained is, one of the highlights of, my movie going experience for that year. It has to be. I remember the year without even actually, I don't think I can name the year on all of these movies, but 2012 for Django Unchained, I'd say that with certainty. So
I could not have been 100% certain on the year, but I can distinctly remember going to see it Christmas Day. Like, this is not something I'm waiting for the weekend for, like, this is opening on Christmas. We're going on Christmas. So what put Django so low on your list?
Okay, so I think a good place to start is to recognize again that none of these movies are terrible movies. In fact, what I really like about Django Unchained is all the straight up interesting supporting characters all across the board, good guys and bad guys. Tarantino just did a great job making them all interesting. Christoph Waltz, anytime he's in a Tarantino movie, he's almost stealing the show. But even Samuel L. Jackson, he was excellent in this as well.
Oh yeah.
And then Leonardo DiCaprio, of course. But nothing against Jamie Foxx, but I think there's something amiss with your movie if all your supporting characters are interesting and your main character isn't. And not even at the end of the film, I still did not find him interesting at all.
Well, it sounds like you got a bit of the Will Smith mentality, because when Will Smith turned down the role, because he was the one who Quentin wanted to cast in it initially, his turn down for it was that he didn't think that Django was the main character, and he wanted Django to be the one to kill Candy and all this other stuff. And Quentin was just like, okay, that's cool. Well, we're not going to debate this. I'll go to somebody else. Take care. And, I've never really thought about it from that perspective of that, like, Django is the least interesting character in the movie. Broomhilda probably, but like, when I think back about that movie, it's DiCaprio, Waltz. I think Sam Jackson's best performance, and I don't even know how long, because even though he's, still really fun with the way he delivers the lines, it's one of those rare things where even when he's a bad guy in some type of movies, he's always kind of doing the cool Sam Jackson of it all. And there's nothing cool about that character. Like, he's a despicable human being. Mm-hmm. And getting to watch Sam Jackson still be Sam Jackson, but try something a little different, to me was just reminded you as to how good he actually is. As great as Christoph Waltz is in that movie, I probably would go Oscar-wise Sam Jackson, and then maybe DiCaprio, and then Christoph Waltz. Yeah, no, the performances are out of this world. But yeah, like, is there anything else besides kind of like the main character lacking that kind of drag? Because I got another part that kind of dragged it down for me a little bit. But any other parts for you that kind of put it a little lower on your list?
I think there's things that didn't land what was intended to come across as romantic, like Christoph Waltz reintroducing Django to Kerry Washington's character. That didn't. There was also some cutesiness about their, it didn't work for me, which is one of the reasons why Kill Bill's so low on my list. There's Tarantino will sometimes do cutesy stuff that I just don't think work at all.
To me, the part that also kind of drags me down with that movie is each time I watch it outside of maybe the first, because you're kind of going, oh, where's this going to go? When you go from what happens at Candyland to him then getting caught and then almost kind of instantly going right back to Candyland and then having the massacre feels like you're dragging the movie out too long for me. Like, you know, they kill Candy. He, you know, tries to start killing more people. They capture him. They sell him. We get the weird Australian Tarantino scene. And then he goes right back and finishes the job. And I don't know, to me, that felt like we're dragging the movie on, you know, an extra 15 minutes where, like, if you'd maybe had it where we killed DiCaprio like an hour and 20 minutes in, and then we spent like 40 minutes of, you know, Django trying to make his way back, and then we get that ending, like, that's okay. But this way just felt like we got to extend this another 20 minutes. So let's have him sort of fail, but then come instantly back, because there's almost nothing between, like I said, just the weird Australian Tarantino-ness of it all.
Did it have anything to do with Tarantino's terrible Australian accent?
I mean, the fact that I remember it so well, it's so funny. Like that part doesn't ruin it for me, but just the whole, we have to go on one last quick little aside, and then we're going to wrap the movie up. I don't know. It just one ending too many. So yeah, that's one of my bigger complaints on it, quite frankly.
All right. Fair enough. Right. So my number 7 is Death Proof. So
all right, let's get into Death Proof.
Yeah.
I freaking love Death Proof. I remember, even though it's only my number 8, so like I acknowledge the problems that some people can have with it. And I'm probably going to talk myself into having it higher than Django, quite frankly. I remember Grindhouse night or 2 nights before it came out, because we were watching the tech print of it when I worked at AMC. You know, Grindhouse as a whole, I think, is an insanely enjoyable experience. Planet Terror on its own, I think, would be a fine experience. Death Proof on its own, though, I still think holds up. I know Quentin, he's okay with that being his worst movie, which we'll get into later, that I don't think it is. But I would say it's uninteresting for a lot of it. But the stunts that Zoe Bell is doing on the hood of that car, I am enthralled the entire time.
Yeah, for me, I try to judge it. It is a bit long when you watch it on its own, because you get the uncut version. But, when you watch, it as that double feature of Grindhouse, I just think it just shows what a better filmmaker Tarantino is over Robert Rodriguez. I mean, I like Robert Rodriguez's movies, but I mean, it is in comparison to Tarantino, is much more popcorn. Death Proof, comparing it with Planet Terror, I mean, Death Proof takes patience and it pays off in the end. Whereas, Planet Terror is just entertainment from start to finish. And it's more of a preference thing. I think some of the dialogue in Death Proof might cause it to be a little low on my list, but I absolutely love the movie. And I enjoy watching it every couple of years.
The first group that we spend time with, I don't think is even close to as interesting as the second group we spend time with. So yeah, that first group, I can definitely see, like, when they're talking about their problems and stuff, just sort of kind of zoning out a little bit. But to me, I also look at that as like, they are the example of like, here's how it goes when Stuntman Mike is having a good day. so you understand why you need to be worried about this second group you're about to watch, until of course they flip the script on everything. And I adore watching both Kurt Russell in his like really menacing, like, you guess you have to get scared now, versus like, no, don't, please, my arm, it's broken.
That was so worth it. I mean, even after the car chase scene, him crying like that is just the cherry on top.
It's the best. And I can remember when we had that at AMC, I would go downstairs in projection and I'd watch like the last few minutes just to see the audience lose their minds at those girls just beating the ever-loving shit out of him. You watch that with a crowd of people and they aren't sitting there rooting for Stuntman Mike, where some movies like obviously like your Nightmare on Elm Streets and all that, or Halloween even, like you're kind of rooting for the bad guy to like kill these teenage girls. Where in this, it's like, no, you're rooting for these young women to beat the ever loving shit out of Stuntman Mike, and it's pretty fucking awesome when it happens.
Yeah, there's a different type of bloodlust in Tarantino's films than there are with other like horror movies where there's a villain picking innocent people off, and I think I'm a huge horror movie fan. And one of the reasons that I love the Scream series so much is because it's actually not about Ghostface. It's actually about a lot of the actual characters that are at risk of getting killed. And, as you get into the sequels, there's these main characters. So it's actually about the good guys. It's a horror movie about the good guys. But you take Halloween, as much as I admire the first film, Nightmare on Elm Street, just Chucky, Child's Play, Hellraiser. I mean, it is about that specific villain and him killing a bunch of people. Whereas with Tarantino, it is him fulfilling a fantasy of Nazis, Nazi revenge. Same with slavery, and most recently the Manson family murders. So exactly. It is a little. It's the bloodlust is different.
Yeah, and Scream's a good comparison to those horror type movies of like, I can't tell you any Jason movie where I'm not rooting for Jason to like kill a bunch of people. Yeah. Where I can tell you right now, like I'm going to be really sad, like if they off David Arquette in the opening minutes of the new one. You know what I mean? Like I'm going to be sad. Like when Halloween, before they rebooted it back to number 1, when they kill off Laurie at the beginning of the Busta Rhymes one, I wasn't even sad that Laurie died. You know what I mean? It's just like, okay, cool, we're moving on. I don't care. Like it's over. Where if that happens, like I'm going to root for Courtney Cox and David Arquette to not be killed. Where if this were any other horror franchise, I'd be like, yeah, kill him. I don't give a shit. So, all right.
I mean, I'm not sure how well versed you are, but I mean, even by the second film, I don't know if you remember Jamie Kennedy's character. He had survived the first film. He was also in the second film, and they killed him off. And in the fandom, that was actually a pretty impactful death. I think they developed their central characters well enough to make them, you fear for their death and be very sad when they go. And this is a slasher film where people are supposed to die. And similar to Tarantino, I mean, Tarantino really fleshes out his characters. I think a good example is Vincent Vega, basically in Pulp Fiction. I mean, that's just one movie, but it's like, okay, he doesn't survive. You feel that impact. Or Django Unchained, for example, Dr. Schultz. That was a very sad death when he is willing to die just so he could kill Candy, right? Yeah. So, I mean, there's a different type of bloodlust there. So,
yeah, for sure. And no, my friend and I actually did our kind of like Halloween thing. We went and rewatched all the Screams over the course of like less than a week, maybe, just this past October. And like, I'd forgotten how good, honestly, all 4 of them are. Three was the one we enjoyed the least, but I was still kind of going like, to use the example again, it's not the Phantom Menace. But like, yeah, like, I mean, I was remembering one was going to be just straight up a classic. And then I was like, okay, and then I'm going to kind of a mixed bag with the rest. But those to me are in high regard of like franchise movies. And I have my expectations set pretty high for the new one, even though they're doing the thing that I can't stand, which is just calling it Scream.
Oh man, don't even get me started.
Like at least go like Scream the Next Generation or like something. You know what I mean? Don't just when you go like, oh, this is just called Halloween. It's like, oh, so we're rebooting Halloween. No, it's technically the first one that's going to count since Halloween 1. So it goes Halloween, Halloween Kills, and whatever the last one's going to be called. And it's just like, so we have technically 3 movies now called Halloween.
Yes.
But within this continuity, there's 2 of them called Halloween. It's just the newest Halloween is technically Halloween 2 because Halloween 2 doesn't exist. It's like, what?
Yeah.
So like that is one of my biggest turnoffs of like And here's the thing, if you wanted to just flat out reboot Scream and be like, it is a reboot, these other ones didn't happen, like the terrible Ghostbusters remake, and you just want to just call it Scream, okay. Like, I don't like the idea of a reboot, but you're starting over, fine. But it's not a reboot. It's like, one of those weird sequels that they're going to try and claim as a reboot, but it happened in the universe. So you have to give it either a number or a separate or a different or a title to differentiate it from the fucking real movie called Scream. That's not what we're here to discuss, but yeah, I think we're on the same page there. Like, it's the dumbest marketing on the face of the planet, and I fucking hate it.
Well, I think this January we can have an episode about that and kind of get into
I'd be
that,
in.
I have a lot of opinions about that as well.
Yeah, I'd be in. So let's see, we just did 7.
We're at number 6 now.
All right, so number 6, and well, we'll get into it more when we discuss it. I'm going to put Jackie Brown.
Oh, so do I. Jackie Brown, number 6 for me as well.
Jackie Brown, I'm going to say right now, if we did this again in 10 years, and the only reason I think maybe not is because of how much I really, really love everything above Jackie Brown. God damn, man. Every time I watch that movie, I like it more. And I get a feeling that the older I get, I'm going to appreciate it even more. And I have just this feeling that, like, if I watch that movie when I'm, closer to Robert Forster or Pam Grier's ages, that I could sit there and be like, this is his best movie.
It's a really good movie. It builds tension very well. It's got very charismatic characters. It's just unfortunate that it was made by such a prolific filmmaker who kind of took a detour from his regular style. So there's just things about it that aren't him, and so therefore I don't think it can ever really be my favorite Tarantino movie because it doesn't feel like a Tarantino. There's certain things about Tarantino movies, if you're a fan, that you really, really like. This doesn't actually feel like Tarantino characters, in some ways, in other ways it does. But I never really had that mixed bag feeling with any of his other films. I knew this was a character that only Tarantino could create. And that's just not the case with Jackie Brown due to the circumstance that it's based on a book.
Rum Punch, right?
Yeah.
I will for sure say that if you took any other one of his movies and said, oh, there's actually another movie out there that's not at all made by Tarantino, this is in the same universe as, you'd stop and go like, well, what the fuck could that be? Where when you watch this and Out of Sight, which I also love, which are both, Elmore Leonard, and they both have the Michael Keaton character, in both of them. I can watch both those movies and go like, yeah, I totally believe these Soderbergh's movie and Tarantino's movie could completely be in the same universe, not just because of Michael Keaton, but like Michael Keaton doesn't stick out as a sore thumb of being like, what's this Quentin Tarantino character doing in Steven Soderbergh's movie? Where like any other Tarantino movie, if Rick Dalton popped up in a Christopher Nolan movie, you'd be like, what the fuck is going on here? In the areas of Tarantino where it does work, because I think like the dialogue is all, very Tarantino. If in 20 years I could sit here and think to myself, like, you know what, actually this hits up to number 5 or number 4 even or something. I love it that much. I think it's a real underrated gem, and I love too how people who do think it's his best work, and I think that's really good that it'll get more eyes on it than I think it would have otherwise.
Nice. So what's your number 5 pick?
All right, so number 5, this is when we're going to be getting into movies that I'm still going to give 5 stars to. Number 5, I'm going to go with Reservoir Dogs.
Okay. I think for me, the top 4 will probably be the 5 stars. I think for my number 5 pick, I rank it very, very high. I probably would not give it a 5 out of 5 though, but it is Hateful Eight.
There we go. Now, did you end up watching the Netflix version as well?
I've seen that a couple of times. I actually prefer that version. I like it broken up into 4 different episodes. I think it's great.
What puts Hateful Eight aside for you?
Some of it has to do with the idea that it was supposed to start out as a play. And so I think where some people might criticize it for being boring, because plays don't always transition very well into movies, and I mean they can't make certain movies into play, so the two mediums don't always mesh well together. But I thought that in this scenario it does, and in a lot of ways I do view it as a play of sorts, and I felt that the dialogue, it carried most of the movie like it should have, and the villains are all fleshed out. I really like how Jennifer Jason Leigh basically still steals the movie, and they I know a lot of people were criticizing it as being a womanizing film, but I felt that they treated her equally, and she held her ground very well. I think she was probably the highlight of that movie, in a movie that everyone did an excellent job in. Everyone kind of escaped in their roles.
And forget even the whole her holding her own thing. Back then, these people would not stand there and go, "Don't you hit a woman." Yeah. So when I hear the whole controversy over like, oh, the way they beat her constantly, it's like, you're right. Like, that's exactly how they would have treated a man in that same situation. But it's also like, oh, I'm sorry. Did these guys out in the Old West go through like, modern feminism or anything like that? It's like, what are you talking about? They, of course, would have no qualms about hitting a woman. And it's crazy to like.
Oh. I mean, Tarantino does not shy away of what is PC now and put it in his movies. He wants to be try to be authentic in certain things, and
as he should.
All of the characters. I mean, even the ninth character, poor Obi, who he's kind of the only nice one, which is probably why he's one of the reasons he doesn't count as part of the Hateful Eight. I just thought it was a very fun movie, a good example of an entertaining movie where the dialogue carries most of it. I think, as a writer and hearing other writers talk, classes and all of that, the old fashioned show don't tell type of thing. I think this is, a situation where sometimes the opposite works, where you kind of tell a lot of the story instead. So I admire it for that.
Yeah, and once again, I'm gonna beat this one to death. It's like, it's not a movie I dislike. I gave it 4 stars on Letterboxd.
Yeah.
But it for sure feels like a play. Because if you take out the stagecoach, you just have one set that you could do a play and not have to fuck around with changing the sets on it. It's all takes place in the one place. And I agree with basically everything you're saying about like, the dialogue's great. The actors are all doing, a spectacular job for the most part. I love the story of how Kurt Russell broke what he thought was a prop with that guitar that turned out to actually be a legitimate, really old guitar.
I keep a close eye on Jennifer Jason Leigh during that scene just to watch her shock.
Exactly, and she doesn't fully which that would be the scariest part in the world to me too. Of like, it's one thing to see her character get a little shocked at like the outburst. It's another though if she'd been like, "Damn it, Kurt, what are you doing?" It's like, "Oh shit, I ruined the take."
Yeah,
it's just like so lucky that you stayed in enough to at least save the take itself. But yeah, as far as the reason I would have it so low as like my bottom, this seems really overly simplistic, but like there's usually like a really high cool factor for a Quentin Tarantino production, and I don't get any of that vibe out of it. I just kind of get like, it's all well done. I'm having a good time with it, but I don't know if it's the lack of like the needle drops that really kind of help with his movies. There's like that Roy Orbison song at the end, and there's I think a White Stripes one in there as well.
Yeah.
But those always kind of like help keep me in the mood of like I'm watching a Quentin Tarantino movie. There was also something to me too of like the ending, as like gloriously violent as it is, just kind of feels like, okay, you kind of just did the same thing with the ending of Django. You've done the same thing with, the ending of the first Kill Bill. It's just like, okay, we're just going to go into like crazy violence territory, which we'll discuss later with another movie, my number one movie. But like, I don't know. It all just kind of leaves me feeling kind of hollow of like, okay, I had a really good time with that. Probably could have made my top 10 of the year if I thought about it. I could also see a situation where like it ends up on like your honorable mentions, like just outside of it, depending upon how good the rest of that year was. I have no desire to revisit it either. I remember when I rewatched everything before Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, it was like the bottom of like my interest list. And the part that I think jumped it up was like, oh, I want to see what that Netflix version's all about. So for for me is where I'll go Pulp Fiction.
You're going to go Pulp Fiction number 4. All right.
Yep.
So number 4 for me is Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Ooh, okay. So we are now going to get into a discussion, which is as far as this big gap will go, which is where I will put as one movie, Kill Bill.
All right. So Kill Bill number 3 for you.
Yes. Now, keep in mind, when we're looking at 5 stars, my number 1 to me is default number 1. Number 2, I think, is probably also default number 2. But when we get to 3, 4, and 5, I could see a situation where, like, depending upon the day, I might drop 1 a space, drop 1 up a space, or something like that. But to me, Kill Bill is going to always have the nostalgia of this was my first. Like, was this also your first for Tarantino, or?
My opening to his career. I think maybe I knew who he was after watching From Dusk Till Dawn, and then I watched Pulp Fiction. So I guess my opening would be Pulp Fiction. But this Kill Bill Volume 1 is the first Tarantino movie I saw in a movie theater. So. Yeah,
no, it was my first one in general, and for sure first one in the movie theater. And like, I knew who he was because he was such like a prominent like pop culture figure. But I was still in high school, so it was like, what got me into like movies as far as like award-winning type stuff was Good Will Hunting.
Mm-hmm.
Like, because like the Robin Williams of it all, right? And that was 97. Like, that was like my opening. So to me, even going only as far as 2003, not a whole lot of time to kind of go back and see the stuff I'd missed, by only a few years, like a Pulp Fiction or something like that. So yeah, so going into Kill Bill as like the first time seeing his stuff, it was such a mind-blowing experience. Your mind exploding as to everything you were seeing. And to me, it's also his most like, it's his movie that definitely feels most like there's a whole lot of lore to it and like franchise potential, like how he was talking about how, forget just any possible plans he has in his brain for like a part 3. Even just like, I was thinking I could do like a comic book series about like the Deadly Viper Assassination Squad in their heyday. And then I could do like an anime about, Bill learning from Pai Mei and Hattori Hanzo and like all this other stuff. And the comic nerd in me, which he delves into himself in part 2 with the whole Superman speech, just makes that whole movie feel like there's such a bigger world out there that we're probably never going to explore.
Well, for Kill Bill Volume 1, had we done this, the 2 volumes separately, I think it would have ended up at number 5 on my list between Once Upon a Time in Hollywood and The Hateful Eight. Kill Bill Volume 2 would have still been on my last. The reason that combining them, I don't like meet halfway on the list, is one of the things that I've noticed about my list is my enthusiasm for the ending of each of these films. I think kind of weighs into why I love these movies so much and where I rank them. As I stated earlier, I like Death Proof, for example. You kind of have to earn that ending, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like Kill Bill's ultimate ending is not good. And I think that's pretty much the only thing I don't think about Tarantino's work as not good. When, the bride finally finds out that she has a daughter and this, dialogue, witty showdown, between Uma and David, it just doesn't work for me. None of it works for me. Not even when she does the 3-finger whatever and he gets up.
5-point palm exploding heart technique.
Thank you. It doesn't work for me. It doesn't work when he says, "How do I look?" and he gets up and walks to it. And none of it works for me. Again, the cutesy ending, the bride, aka Beatrix Kiddo, aka mom, it doesn't work for me. None of that ending works for me. So if we're talking about a 4-hour movie, the first 3 hours and 15 minutes, I absolutely love. But the final 45 minutes, quite honestly, last time I watched it, I turned it off. Once it got to David Carradine's scene, I turned it off. I was done. I said, I'm not interested in watching this anymore.
I think a lot of it for you is probably Carradine.
I haven't seen enough of his work to say I don't like him, but in this movie, he appealed to me when I didn't see him, when it was just his voice, when it was, when they were kind of just teasing his introduction in the first film. But when we actually saw him, it just none of it landed for me. So I think a big issue is strictly the second volume. And there were other things about the second volume that I found were very disappointing. I was really excited to see Michael Manson's, Bud, how kind of he turned out, because they teased him a lot in the first movie, but we didn't actually know a whole lot about him. And I thought it was satisfying, but I thought there were some missed opportunities there. In particular, I felt that there were hints that Bud didn't really want to kill the bride. He felt obligated to. And I think the subtlety does work in some ways, but I think it could have been a little more obvious had they actually brought that to the forefront, and maybe him actually turn into an unexpected ally to the bride instead. I mean, he can still end up dead for all we care, but to kind of twist the list so that the bride actually realizes, you know what, maybe I don't want to kill everyone on here. Maybe some people on this list weren't as responsible as I originally held them to be. All of that. I think that could have been, I think that was a missed opportunity. I thought it could have been far more interesting. I also was very disappointed about Daryl Hannah, right?
Oh, L Driver.
Yes. I really wanted a showdown. And I think in some ways, having her second eye pulled out was satisfying, but because we knew her so well, she kind of came across as the primary antagonist, not Bill himself. Bill himself ended up being too much of, I don't know, I don't want to say anti-hero, but he was almost too chummy with the bride that I just didn't feel like this was climactic.
Okay, like one, and we'll delve back into part one. But yeah, we're in agreement that part two is the weaker of the two entries. The part that I remember really upsetting me when I first watched them was the handling of Bud and L Driver, with how when you come out of the first one, she's just like murder. Then you get to the next two and she's not even the one who gets to kill Bud. So to me right there, I was just like, well, that feels like I got cheated. Mm-hmm. Even if, like you said, like, because I do like how he does kind of have the attitude of like, yeah, you know what, we deserve this. But at the same time, I don't want to die. So like, I'll do what I got to do to not get myself killed. But he's also not going to go out of his way to like, I'm going to help you track her down and like stop this. But like, if she comes here, then I'm going to defend myself, which I did like that. But yeah, when she's not even the one who kills him, like that annoyed me. Only taking out L Driver's eye, or her second eye, and mind you, she has no eyes at this point. But and not killing her also to me felt very like, wait a minute, you're promising me you're going to kill every last one of these fuckers, and you just missed one where somebody else got to kill him. And then the person who took that kill away from you don't even kill them.
I have no problem if expectations are subverted, but I mean, this is a kill bill that you've created with 5 people on it. The first 2 people on it, all Lucy
going
Liu
well.
and Vivica A. Fox's characters, you killed in cold blood, and you don't even kill Bud. And I thought, okay, maybe she goes back on it. And, like I already said earlier, this would have been an interesting opportunity, but then she leaves the other one basically for dead. I guess it's implied that the Viper is going to poison her. But again, we get a question mark at the very end of the film, which is another annoyance of mine. Yeah, I didn't even think about that till you brought that up. Maybe this was a subconscious thing, or just one other thing on the pile of things I don't like about Kill Bill Volume 2.
The part that kind of eases me with the L Driver part, at least, is when you hear Quentin talk about the possibility of 3 is his last movie, which he's even acknowledged, like, I don't know how I'm going to market that, because I am telling you guys it's only one movie. I'm going to call it Kill Bill 3. He does mention, forget just the idea of, Vivica A. Fox's kid out there for revenge. He's like, well, L Driver, is potentially out there as well. And that's where I do stop and I get a little more okay with it if I go, okay, if we are going to get a third movie and we want to turn it out where like, she's the one who's going to, be the, blind expert who teaches Vivica A. Fox's kid what she needs to know to go kill them, I'd be a little more cool with it. But I also feel like it'd be better if you'd found a way where she was, of course, a blind person in there with those snakes is probably going to die. But I'd also sit there and go, but she's also a world-class assassin and she might find her way out of there. If it were a scene instead where the bride really thought she confirmed the kill, and you did it in a way where you're like, yeah, actually, you know what? If the medics got there in time, maybe they could fix this. I'd be a little better with it. Instead of her just kind of walking away and being like, this will sort itself out.
Yeah.
So where do you stand then on the topic of that though? With I think we kind of said before that we talked a little bit about if he were to end with number 3, like where do you stand with that?
So disappointed.
I can see the whole like, oh, I don't have to be the last one, but if it was his next one and he wasn't going to finish, I would go like, you have to do this 100%. I think it's too good of an opportunity to pass up.
So yeah, I mean, like all the pieces are there for that. Like if they made a Kill Bill Volume 3, it makes sense. But I get the similar feeling like with The Dark Knight Rises. Like, you know, The Dark Knight had a great ending, but we know that there's more story left. And you're kind of just, it ends up being a little too fan fiction-y because it just, everything, all the ideas, they just fall into place too predictably. And I just don't see it being a satisfying movie.
The one thing I would say versus the Dark Knight Rises comparison is I don't think he would do it unless he knew he had a great idea. Nolan seems to have been, I don't know, saying he was like browbeat by the studio is fair. But I definitely feel that there was a feeling of like, you have to do 3. You were forced to do 3. Like, we will not leave you alone until you've done number 3. But I can see what you mean of like, it does wrap itself up perfectly, but it also like, leaves enough loose ends open to where he could have gone that way, which is what I think is kind of interesting too, because he talked about on one of those podcasts about how after Grindhouse tanked, how, you know, he was getting a lot of scripts sent to him of like, hey, you should direct this, you know, and like not one of your own original movies. And I got to think that if he'd had had Inglourious Basterds not hit after Grindhouse tanked, that we probably would have seen like Kill Bill 3 by now. All right, so 3.
My number 3.
Yes.
So I have Inglourious Basterds at number 3.
All right, so we are now going to talk about Inglourious Basterds because that is my number 2. And yeah, I mean, we can kind of figure out where my number 1 goes at this point, but this to me is one that every time I watch it, I just am kind of mesmerized. There's really only like a handful of like scenes in that movie when you kind of break it down. Like the scene in the bar, for example.
You're able to kind of break down the psychology of that scene better once you actually know what actually ends up happening.
It really is. It makes perfect sense when you watch that movie that he ends it with Brad Pitt being like, I think this might be my masterpiece.
Yes.
And it's just like, yeah, you know what? I think you may be right. How long did it take you to fall in love with Christoph Waltz in that movie?
Yeah, like I think it was when he started to eat. I can't remember what he was eating, but he was eating and he was interrogating Shoshana in the restaurant.
It's like strudel or something, isn't it?
It was like a strudel with the cream, and you know he had his coffee, milk, and all of that. Like, you know, definitely, you know, in the opening scene when he's there, like he captured me. But when he was actually interrogating her in the restaurant, making all these subtleties, like Shoshana couldn't quite know for sure, but she was terrified. And even to this day, I don't really even know for sure either. But I was like, okay, this is going to be one of my favorite Tarantino characters. That's when I realized that.
I still remember seeing that thing opening night, and I remember just sitting there just being mesmerized by this guy who I'd never even heard of, because he's somebody who, like, unless you're familiar with like random TV shows from, you know, Germany or something, it's like you don't know who Christoph Waltz is. Mm-hmm. And he comes in there and just how he still manages to be in that uniform and still like charming your pants off. Oh, if this guy wasn't a Nazi, like he'd be like the most charming human being I've ever met. It's an insanely impressive performance. And back to all those podcasts he's been doing, he was talking about how they weren't cracking that character as far as like finding the right actor, because like he was saying, the biggest qualm he was going to have was, yeah, you know, I can find actors and have them recite their lines in German. I can have them recite lines in French. He's like, but it's going to feel like it's just, this actor learned these lines in German and he's delivering his lines. And they were apparently like this close to being like, we're going to give it like another week of trying to find, or we're going to dedicate the next week exclusively to trying to find Arlanda. And if we don't find Arlanda in the next week, I'm just going to shelf this and I'll come back to it another time. Like maybe I'll do it in 10 years because it's a World War II movie. It's kind of evergreen in the sense of like, I can make it 20 years from now. I can make it today. It's not going to be not topical. And then he walked in. They fell in love with him like instantly in the audition. And Quentin said something like, how great the guy did. And Waltz's response was something along the lines of like, I appreciate you saying that, but I am just the vessel for the words that you've written down on the paper. That is the real star here. But he said it in a more Christoph Waltzy way. And that's when Tarantino is just like, oh, you are this charming guy. But yeah, watching him just so easily talk in all those different languages and be as charming as he is while being a Nazi, it's spectacular. But he's not the only one that's great in that movie, though. Brad Pitt, I think, is awesome in that movie. Watching him have to pretend to speak Italian is one of the funniest things I've ever seen in my life.
But it's one of the things, I'm not bilingual or anything like that, but, I always enjoyed watching movies with subtitles because it helped me kind of, get into a world that I wasn't really familiar with. And what I enjoy is seeing similarities and differences between, my culture versus another culture. And so what always annoyed me was when, they would make a movie that took place in a different country and they would still speak English. Sometimes to the extent of having an accent while still speaking English. And when I went in and I noticed, that there was actually French being spoken and of course, German being spoken and even Italian being spoken. I was like, it's amazing how the fantasy World War II movie is being more authentic than some of the other more serious World War II movies.
Yeah, 100%. Like, I completely understood exactly what Tarantino said when he was talking about like, yeah, I can get the actors to learn these lines in German, but I'm not going to believe they actually speak German.
Right.
But when you watch Christoph Waltz, who apparently knows all four of these languages, you can just tell.
And I wonder if Brad Pitt's Italian was kind of a joke on what could have been. Could have been such a far much worse.
I could see that.
Yeah.
It's being like that. This is what you could be watching.
Right.
Is something as bad as what he's purposely doing right now. But we did get Austin Powers, Mike Myers, and one of the weirder cameos I've ever seen in a movie.
Yeah, I guess it works. It is kind of a weird casting choice.
It's very weird.
It works, though. It's not distracting. No. He does an okay job. I just don't know if he's actually serious or not. And I think that's probably one of the issues having casting a guy like Michael Myers. Like, Robin Williams in Good Will Hunting. I mean, Robin Williams is a funny guy, but we know this is a serious role. Or Adam Sandler in Punch Drunk Love. We know it's a serious role, even though he's known for his comedy. But here, I don't know if Mike Myers is trying to be for real or not, or he's just kind of doing his shtick.
It wouldn't be as weird if he was still a working actor.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm just being like, where did you even come up with the idea of having Mike Myers in this movie for one scene? It's the most bizarre, where did this come from? But I think
it just goes to show maybe, this is just an assumption, but it probably goes to show how much networking goes on in Hollywood. Maybe Tarantino and Mike Myers just, rub shoulders at a party one day and Tarantino's like, oh, hey, you know what? This will be fun. I love your Scottish accents that you do all the time. What can you do for a British accent, So I imagine it could have just been something like that. I don't think Mike Myers went to a casting call.
No, I don't believe for a second he auditioned for that movie.
Move on to my number two.
Yeah.
Number 2 and number 3 for me were really, really close, but I think I ranked this just a little higher because I've had more time with it, and it's kind of more personal to me, and actually more of a creative inspiration than Inglourious Basterds was. But Pulp Fiction is my number 2. So yeah, we might get some thumbs down because Pulp Fiction's not number 1. Clearly his magnum opus. I mean, it's just I can watch this movie a million times and not get bored of it. I think the only thing that doesn't land for me, and I can still see why people are charmed by it, and so therefore I don't really consider it a flaw, is maybe some of Uma Thurman's delivery, specifically at Jack Rabbit's, just doesn't seem as natural. It does seem a bit over the top and a little bit forced, but overall I think it's a perfect picture.
See, I love her over the top forced because she is the only thing that I will defend about Batman and Robin. It's very clear that she's trying to be over the top in both those situations. And I'm with you about how, like, you could watch it and be like, okay, this is a little too, like, different than what everybody else is going for. But at the same time, I think she's very good at doing that, and she's doing it on purpose. It's not like a bad performance, but I can see what you mean about that. But personally, I really love it. Yeah, Pulp Fiction, another one that I can't sit here and tell you any negatives about. The only thing that I think probably put it down for me at like number 4 was probably like how you said, you can watch it a million times and never get sick of it. I too could also probably watch it a million times and never get sick of it. But I also, there's a part of me that does almost feel like, because I have seen it so many times, that I don't want to say the shine is worn off, but it feels almost like if you sit and watch Dr. No, as it establishes every single James Bond trope, and it still holds up as a great James Bond movie. But then when you've seen all of the James Bond movies after that, Dr. No kind of doesn't stick out as well. When you've kind of seen not just Pulp Fiction itself so many times, or Quentin kind of master some of the stuff he does in Pulp Fiction so many times, and of course, all the fucking ripoffs of things that want to be Pulp Fiction, not to mention how many parodies have we seen of Pulp Fiction, is because it was so influential and so many things like stole from it or parodied it or whatever. It feels kind of Austin Powers-ish in a way, to bring back Mike Myers so quickly, where you forget how good Austin Powers 1 actually is if you haven't seen it in like 10 years.
Oh, I watched. I mean, that's one of my favorite comedies. I watch the first one every couple of years.
It's fantastic.
Yeah.
But if we went back to like 2001, after hearing a bajillion people, go, yeah, baby, there's a part of you where you go like, I don't need any more goddamn Austin Powers in my life. Then you actually sit and watch the real genuine artifact, and you're like, oh yeah, there's a reason why everybody's ripping this off and everybody's doing their impressions, because it's fucking amazing. So I feel like there might be a tad bit of that with Pulp Fiction for me. And also before we move off it, of like, I think because Quentin talked about this as well in a podcast recently, I think it puts a bit of an unfair expectation on him, because it wasn't the last one he did, but it was the most famous example of him pulling people out of obscurity and giving them careers again.
Yeah.
To where I feel there's like an unfair expectation almost with him of like, Luke Perry's in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Man, Luke Perry's gonna have a John Travolta like come back. It's like, or he's just gonna have him have 3 lines and move on. I mean, Pam Grier didn't work out the way he wanted it to. David Carradine didn't work out the way he wanted. Did anybody else have the John Travolta or Bruce Willis type response from his movies? But that's what we think of Quentin of doing, though, of like the guy who he pulls you out of obscurity.
Maybe Kurt Russell a little bit. Again. I think maybe Kurt Russell.
No, 100%, because I never thought about him honestly until after Death Proof, and he's had a really good comeback for the most part of actually being like in major movies. That's a good example, but
he can't do it for everyone, and I get that. Maybe Pulp Fiction set up that expectation.
Fantastic movie. Everybody's fantastic in it. The needle drops are fantastic. Style's fantastic. Absolutely love it.
All right. I mean, there's there's a lot of things the way they are because of that movie. Not just, yeah. So I think before we get to number one, I just want to point out what an awesome movie True Romance is. And it's a shame we couldn't put this on the list.
Yeah, no, I've been meaning to go back and rewatch that for a bit. From Dusk Till Dawn is entertaining as shit too. That was like my one exception when I rewatched all the Tarantino directed movies of like one he was only involved in the writing of.
Yeah.
To rewatch as well. But where do you stand on Natural Born Killers?
That movie deserves a rewatch. I haven't seen it in 20 years.
Yeah, it's been a very long time. And I remember at the time I enjoyed it, but when I was listening to one of those podcasts he did recently, apparently he's never even watched it in its entirety. I forget who the interviewer was on this one, but it was another guy who also like writes movies, who basically was, summing up how that script is apparently like right up there with the best scripts Quentin's ever written. And then Oliver Stone was just like, I'm going to do this instead, and this instead, and this instead, and this instead. And it's just like a deformed monster of what that thing was supposed to be.
So much changes from script to actually filming and then actually post-production that, I mean, Reservoir Dogs, for example, I think there was some script changes, even before they started filming. So I'm not really sure how authentic of a version, if I just read Tarantino's script, how much that would stay the same. But I will say that, Oliver Stone does deserve a rewatch on my part, because I kind of cut him off. I didn't really care for him back when I was kind of watching like all of these classic movies for the first time. Like you get to an age where you really love movies and you kind of realize that there's this whole backlog of movies you'd never seen because you were a kid or it was before you were born. So like around 16, 17, 18, I watched all of a good portion of the classics, including Oliver Stone stuff. And I didn't particularly care for Oliver Stone's, but that was, more than half my life ago. I might think of things a little differently now. And that includes Natural Born Killers.
Don't you miss, speaking of those days, I remember that same thing of like around that time when like post Good Will Hunting, where I was just like, oh, I've got to go back and see like, these movies that were the Good Will Hunting and even like 2 years ago. Don't you miss the feeling of, I don't know which one it was for you. For me, it was a Hollywood video of just going in and going through the sections and like having the physical tape in your hand. And you're like, I'm going to finally see Clerks. I'm going to finally see Reservoir Dogs. And like having that tape, taking it home, watching it, probably watching it more than once because you're like, I want to watch it again and I only have until like Friday to do it. Now there's even a part of you that just goes like, it's on every fucking streamer you could possibly have. Like you have like a billion of them, and you just sit there, and unless it really gets you on the right day, you're just not gonna watch stuff that you've intended to watch potentially for 20 years. It's just sitting there. Where if you went back to when you were like 17 and you were like, no, we're gonna go to the video store. And we're gonna have this in our hand. I got to imagine like we would have so fewer things on like our I have to get around to seeing that if we still were going to Hollywood Video like once a week. Where like as opposed to right now, I could just be like, well, I could own this on iTunes for like $4.
Yeah, for me, it was more about like you see the case on the shelves for so many years, and you're finally like, okay, well, this is it. Now I'm watching it. I don't know. I'm in a bad habit of like not being able to find anything on streaming. Like I oftentimes find myself saying, "Oh, there's nothing to watch," and it's like, okay, pretend like you made the trip all the way to Hollywood Video, and you have to commit to watching it. What are you going to pick out? And so I think even though streaming's more convenient, I think it makes us appreciate it less.
100%. Because it's always right there. Yeah, because you're entirely right. If like there were times you would go into Hollywood Video, whether you're going to rent a video game or a movie or whatever, and you're like, I cannot leave empty-handed because I'm here. Like you said, you say to yourself every day, there's nothing on. And it's like, No, the reality is there's too much on, which makes you feel like there's nothing on.
Everything is on, and it just, you can't savor it. You're not interested in watching it because it's not really an opportunity. It's just kind of there.
Because like I can picture in my head going back to Scream when they're having that discussion in the video store, and just like I can remember like just like how there's like a Clerks poster in the background or something. Of like, I remember seeing like posters for movies that I was never going to see at a certain age. But like they're drilled in my brain because they were in the video store.
Think about it. Like as a 10, 11-year-old kid going through the horror section for movies you wouldn't be able to rent. No one's going to rent those movies for you. You take the scary box and you turn it over and you see like these screenshots of it. I mean, it kind of helps you with your imagination. Like it, and one day you get to an age where you're actually going to rent it and you sit through probably a terrible movie, but it's just the experience of finally being able to watch it after all these years of anticipation and the circumstance in what it was to go to a video store played a big part in the excitement just to see a movie. Now there's just too much pessimism. I mean, I flip through and it's like, okay, this is going to suck. This is going to suck. This is going to suck. And that maybe it's an age thing, or maybe it's the way that it's presented, and it's probably a little bit of both.
Do you remember when they used to have videos at like Safeway?
Oh
like
yeah, I think like that's where before we actually had a Hollywood Video in my town, I think we just grabbed movies at Safeways because if we didn't catch it in theater, chances are Safeway would have it. It wasn't until Hollywood Video came around where it's like, okay, Friday night we're going to spend 20, 30, maybe even up to an hour browsing for a movie or two to last us the weekend.
When you mentioned like the horror, like, because I was allowed to rent them pretty young, but like we're talking like 12 or something, right? Maybe 11. But I remember when you were like 6 or 7, it was not even Hollywood, it was Safeway. And I can remember the one I can picture the clear as day were like all those old Jason movies and the box arts on those. And like, I can picture in my brain, like being at like Safeway and looking at the back of like Jason Takes Manhattan and being like, this is probably the best movie that's ever been made. And I have to see it one day.
Yeah.
And then you see it and it's Jason Takes Manhattan, which is not the best movie ever made, but in your brain, just looking at this, like this still of him, like grabbing somebody through the window on a ship. You're just like, this is the best movie that has ever made. I have to see it. So we're at number 1. So not a lot of surprise here with what we have left.
No.
So my number 1, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. This is one of the ones where I will look at and go, I will never forget where I was when I watched it. I'll never forget the first reactions I had to it. I'll never forget even moments of like seeing the trailers beforehand and just dying to see it. When people talk about like that term, like hangout movies, like movies, like especially where you just like, you want to just like be in that world and hanging out with these characters. That's to me what this really is. And I love every second of it. There's nothing about it I would change in the slightest. But I think we talked about it before off air of the idea of like being nostalgic for something you didn't live through.
Yep.
And that's what this movie does for me. And I remember like when I saw it with my parents and they lived through all of that, I could tell just from sitting next to them, like that they were getting, like, oh, I remember those days. I remember when we dressed like this or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. Like looking at like the teenagers or whatever. And, it's also one of those things that anything that I may have had issues with the first couple times, and issues is even strong, but like the stuff I didn't think was as strong as the rest of the movie, have grown on me over time. You saw it opening weekend, right?
Yeah. 1 or 2 days within it being released. That's not something I would wait a week to see.
Yeah. So there were people there when you saw it. And could you imagine watching that movie as like we're going to dump it on HBO Max, enjoy, and sitting there watching that movie for the first time and seeing like that Manson family scene and not having an audience around you. Because like when we went opening night, that place was cheering. There was laughter. there was like uncomfortable laughter at a couple points in it, with like the way he's just bashing that girl's face into the mantle of, near the wall, and just like it is a experience to watch that movie. And I also think, just from a technical standpoint, which is the part where I get afraid of not just him but anybody who's really talented deciding to hang it up. This is what Bill Maher said to him when he was yelling at him about like, you can't retire. What's wrong with you? Where Bill Maher was just like, you could not have made this movie as well if you'd made it 10 years ago. He's like, you made this movie is as good as it is because of everything you've learned and mastered through your entire career.
Yeah.
You know, and like, that's the part that scares me, where I go like, if you're making something this good, you know, after 9 movies, what could you make after like 15? I'll let you talk about it, because I could go on about it for 2 hours.
The only thing I'll add to that, because I think I agree with everything you said, is it's not just about Tarantino, having the skill set to make this movie now, but it came out at a time where, and it's still like this today, where nostalgia sells, even if you didn't live it.
Yeah.
And this actually came up between my wife and I today, because this whole Lollapalooza thing, the fact that Limp Bizkit can still play to an audience has nothing to do with their quality. It's the nostalgia of being in the 90s. Like, I think everyone, including Limp Bizkit, embraces the campiness, if you'll call it that, of their music. And it's no longer like that as it pertains to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Even if Tarantino was this type of filmmaker, but he made it 10 years earlier, it may not have struck audience the same way, because I think now we long for a world that we no longer have. I think he wants to go out on his terms, and he doesn't want to be, just something that, goes out with a whimper.
So that leaves us then with your number 1.
Reservoir Dogs.
Yes. Love it. Love it. The only reason I would have it as low as I did is some of the same reasons as I had with Pulp Fiction, of like, I feel like we've seen too many, attempts to kind of steal this, and it's been parodied so much and all that. But also, to me, it's like Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction to me are like a coin toss, quite frankly. You know what I mean? Like, they're both so fantastic, so iconic at everything they're doing.
It's interesting how I feel like explaining my position more when something's ranked lower than higher. I think, it's something as simple as I get that this movie is basically a compilation of homages all over the place. It makes something so great, and it doesn't need this bloated budget. It can have an equal amount of action and dialogue. Again, I get why the show not tell teaching exists, but when someone can challenge those rules, I very much admire it. And the fact that this is Tarantino's first film, just everything that had gone right for it. I don't know if I've actually ever seen such a strong debut.
Yeah, I think it's pretty goddamn timeless. Like, you could make that movie as almost the exact same movie today. You also could have made that movie as, a 1970s thriller, because it has a very 70s vibe going on, with the way of how everybody's dressed and the music that's playing, especially the way the music's playing. So yeah, no, it's definitely one of those things where I could even see, to a certain level, of like a Pulp Fiction being like this is a very 90s movie, where like, if you told me Reservoir Dogs was also playing in theaters when like Dog Day Afternoon came out, I'd be like, yeah, I could believe that if I didn't know the ages of these actors or any of the history. But if you just told me like, yeah, this is from the same summer, like Pacino was almost the Tim Roth character, like, okay, yeah, I believe you, because it feels just like that. And to, like you said, because when you mentioned the debut thing too, like, I was really trying to think of other debuts from kind of like the guys who have such strong track records, and I can't think of anybody who really comes close to that. I really enjoyed Hard 8 when I watched it for the first time a year ago. Paul Thomas Anderson wasn't Paul Thomas Anderson for me until Boogie Nights, which was, number 2. Yeah, I'm struggling to think of what's even like a close comparison to like a Reservoir Dogs, of like something where somebody came out the gate and you were just like, yeah, this guy's fucking excellent at what he does. Not like, oh, he has a lot of potential, or like, I'd like to see what this guy does in 5 years. You're just like, no, if he stayed at this exact level of like skill,
Yeah.
He'd still be looked at as like a really fucking great filmmaker. And it's incredibly impressive to watch. And yeah, no, it's another one. Like there's definitely some of these on here where I look at and go like, I really appreciate for the legacy of Jackie Brown that there are people out there who aren't necessarily big Tarantino fans who are just like, but I love Jackie Brown. It's his best movie. I understand why somebody would go, Pulp Fiction's always my number one. And Reservoir Dogs is another one where I'm not going to sit here and be stunned that you put Reservoir Dogs at number one, because it's just one of those ones where I look at and go like, yeah, it's not my number one. On any given day, I could probably be talked into putting it as high as number three, but I could never argue against it. It really is like a perfect like movie. It's insane that it's not just like really good for a debut, and I'm racking my brain to try and think of anything even close, quite frankly, for a first time filmmaker.
I think that brings us full circle in the sense that, I mean, my favorite's his first one. Your favorite's is his most recent one. And
I know, right?
I think it speaks to, what a great filmmaker he is. So
yeah, it's crazy when you really kind of think about it, that he's managed to stay relevant and put out, we basically agree at worst, like really, really good work. I don't know if I could sit here and tell you that he is my favorite filmmaker. It's probably top 2 or 3. I still think Paul Thomas Anderson's my favorite, but the only drawback I really think for him is that because he's kind of like one of those last superstar like director types. I feel a lot of people don't give him his due. You know how like whenever if somebody says like, what's your favorite band? You go like, oh, the Beatles. It's like, well, yeah, duh, of course you're going to say the Beatles. Come up with a more interesting answer than that, right? But then you look at the Beatles and you go like, yeah, but there's a reason why it's kind of the default answer. And I feel like if you and I sat here and talked to some people, we were like, yeah, we really love Quentin Tarantino. It's like, oh God, you're so lazy. Is that the answer you're going to, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
And I think that's a great problem to have. But yeah, I always feel like in a weird way, he's not going to get his due because too many people are going to think like it's not cool to list that he is like an all-time great.
That's what it will always be like when you have someone that kind of dominates some form, like in this case, an art form. I mean, I don't think people were it wasn't as easy to just go see a play, but maybe I'm not sure how good of a comparison this is, but Tarantino could be, the Shakespeare, 100 years from now when movies are kind of a, thing where, that's not the primary means of entertainment, just like how plays still exist, but they're not the primary means of entertainment. And if that day comes, hopefully it doesn't, but I feel like it's kind of already started. Tarantino will be remembered as, the Shakespeare of it. I think people they get bored of the old Austin Powers of the time, and then maybe one day they'll look back in a few years from now and realize why everyone was saying that. But it definitely comes with the territory.
Talk about a good problem to have. You know what I mean? It's like you are winning your awards. So yeah, like I don't put all the stock in the world of that, but there is a part of me that kind of goes like, if a guy who is that fantastic a director never gets Best Picture or Best Director, that's always going to be like a massive black eye on me to like why people don't take those things seriously. Have you picked up Once Upon a Time in Hollywood yet? The book?
No, it might be the next one I read. Like I said, I'm still trying to finish The Godfather.
It's real good, and it definitely makes that movie stronger. The only drawback though is and I won't say what the answer is, but you know how like
we find out what he does to his wife.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, yeah. I guess I'll save it for the book. That way, I'll let Tarantino's own words explain it to me, because I feel like regardless, the fact that I'm getting an answer kind of disappoints me.
That's how I felt when I read it. Like, if you told me that he was going to do a stage play of Pulp Fiction and they were going to turn that briefcase around and show it to the audience and be like, this is canon. This is exactly what was in the movie. I'd probably look at the floor. You know what I mean? Just to be like, I don't want to know.
Yeah.
Don't tell me. Like, if you told me that like all the actors know and like, you know, and there is a definitive answer, great. That's awesome. But I love that we as an audience have that piece. And I didn't think that I would kind of have an answer of like, or get the answer and then kind of be like, oh, and not because of what the answer is, but because I have the answer. It's like, I kind of wish I didn't know this now. Yeah. Other than that though, it's a great read. So fingers crossed if he just becomes an author after this, that he can, you know, keep entertaining us that way.